What's up, Ocean? You got Matt here, and welcome to another discussion video on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Last time we discussed all the buffs that were going to be happening to some notable Pokemon in the new games, and today we're discussing all of the nerfs to 30 notable Pokemon as well. So if you guys are excited for the video, make sure to leave a like on the video. We're aiming for 75 likes on today's content. Subscribe to the channel for more, because we're aiming for 2,000 subscribers before the end of the year. We have, 250 left to go, just about that range. And make sure to comment which Pokemon you thought got the worst nerfs out of them all, or if I missed any Pokemon down below. But let's go ahead and jump on into it. Starting off with the first one, we're going to start looking at Bisharp. Bisharp is the first Pokemon we're going to look at. Why Bisharp, though? Well, the fact that it got number one, I can't say anything. No, I can't say anything about that, because those are spoilers. I don't want to say anything. But the fact that it has no knockoff anymore is really a big deal. Losing knockoff is the most spammable move that this Pokemon had, and it's also the best dark move that it had access to as well. Obviously, it has moves like Night Slash, which could be good if it had access to the new ability Sharpen, for example, but at the end of the day, Sharpen is not an ability this Pokemon gets. The good news is it still gets access to Sucker Punch and Swords Dance, which is going to be the main way it's going to be doing damage consistently nowadays, outside of like just Iron Head. But the utility it lost from knockoff is pretty devastating, to be honest. I wish it kept it. It would make it a lot better Pokemon, but it definitely loses out a lot of utility without having access to the knockoff. Moving on is going to be Charizard, which is basically the mascot of Pokemon now. It's not Pikachu, forget that. It is Charizard. Charizard lost Scorching Sands, which it makes sense. It was a, what was it called? Not a DLC move, but it was a move to remove from Pokemon Sword and Shield. And we know that those moves are not really going to be available in the games going forward. It also lost Defog, which is really bad for this. Losing Defog on Charizard is actually an absolute nightmare, because it was a really solid low-tier Defogger that had access to Boots and was able to come in, recover back up its health with Roost, which it also lost. And just losing all that makes it really tough to justify using Charizard in a bulky sort of capacity. Really what it's going to be now is an offensive break for something like the Solar Power set that you'd see with like a Torkoal or something along those lines. Then we have Blissey. Now Blissey is a Pokemon that's lost a lot. It lost Wish. That's a big deal. Now you can't just wish past these huge 255 base HP wishes into other Pokemon. It does have access to Soft Boil still, which did get nerfed into 5 PP. It lost Toxic, which is a big deal as well, depending on the way you look at it and what type of sets you're going to run. It lost Teleport, which is enormous. Losing the momentum that Blissey just got accustomed to is a really big deal. And then on a lesser note, it did lose Counter. Obviously, the biggest one here is going to be Wish, and I think Teleport is in second place there. If these moves come back and then Blissey gets access to them, it's going to make it so much better, but losing access to Wish and Teleport really affects what Blissey can do as a Pokemon in Smogon, in VGC, and of course in Draft League as well. And now one Pokemon that is arguably one of the biggest nerfs this entire generation is going to be Rillaboom. Yeah, losing Rillaboom is huge. This Pokemon lost Grassy Glide. On top of that, Grassy Glide did get nerfed. It was at like 70 base power, now it's at 60 base power, which, I mean, I get it. It's already getting terrain boosted, and it's going to be stab boost most of the time as well, and its priority doesn't really need to be 70 base power. But the fact that this Pokemon lost it altogether, that's terrible. I can't believe that they got rid of Rillaboom's basically its signature move. I know like it's Jungle Beating or whatever it's called, but still, Grassy Glide is the move that made Rillaboom crazy. Losing that, deadly. On top of that, Knockoff. Getting rid of Knockoff is like the second or third best move this Pokemon has access to, outside of Grassy Glide, which is already like the best move it gets, and U-Turn. It still gets U-Turn, but losing Knockoff for the support options it has is, again, terrible. A lot of these Pokemon really rely on the knockoff support that they can have, and losing the knockoff access that this Pokemon, well, now no longer has, is terrible as well. Superpower was really good to hit something like the Steel types. It also, I believe, lost High Horsepower, which I should mark down as well. High Horsepower and Superpower are the ways that this Pokemon actually hit Steel types, and it can't really do that anymore, which is not great, obviously. It makes this Pokemon really significantly worse. The good news is it still can do some things really well, like Leech Seed and Sub, and Protect and be annoying that way, but I feel like it just lost so much to be even close to be considered OU anymore at all. Next up is going to be Volcanion. This Pokemon, a bit of a buff and a bit of a nerf. And it's a nerf by proxy in a way, because nothing else in the game gets access to Scald now. It is just Volcanion. This is it. This is the only Pokemon that gets access to it nowadays, which is crazy to think. But it also lost Defog. Defog was kind of given around willy-nilly to a lot of Pokemon last generation, which made no sense to me at all, but hey, it is what it is. Defog Volcanion was one of them, and having access to that with Boots made it a reliable Defog, or a reliable hazard remover, which is really solid in certain spots. The issue is, losing that now, and the fact that there's a lot of other Pokemon that have lost Defog, it means that it's going to be a lot harder to make sure that it's going to be a lot harder to make sure that you have a lot of different items on your Pokemon. You're going to want to run Boots on basically everything, and Volcanion being weak to rocks, it's going to be taking 25% as being the only Scald user in the game. It really loses a bit of potency here, but I do think it'll still be around a maybe UUBL to OU Pokemon because it is the only Scald user. It also gets the Steam Eruption as well, which is still solid. I just feel like losing Scald was one of the worst things for a lot of Pokemon, and the fact that Volcano is the only Pokemon with it is obviously an advantage for it, but losing Defog is still a nerf. Another Pokemon with the potential for being one of the worst nerfs out there is going to be Weavile. This Pokemon lost Knockoff and not Icicle Crash. That's my mistake there. It lost Triple Axle. Losing Triple Axle and Knockoff are terrible. One of the reasons why Triple Axle was so good was because it was able to take a Icicle Crash, which was already inaccurate, and make it into potentially a much more deadly attacking move. It also loses Knockoff, which is the most spammable move it has. This Pokemon lost its two best moves outside of maybe Ice Shard. That's not good. The fact that this Pokemon also has a Pokemon that is basically just directly power creeping it, which I'm not going to say anything more about, is not good at all. Again, I'm trying to just come up with different adjectives for this, but none of these things are good. I don't think any of these things are good for the competitive metagame. I really like to have Weavile with Knockoff and Triple Axle. It's going to be much more easily, well, handleable is what the word I'd be saying it is. But the fact that it has 125 speed, 120 attack, now no longer has its best Dark move in Knockoff, its best Ice move in Triple Axle, is really going to be making Weavile probably a UU Pokemon at the absolute most. Wow, it is just devastating for it. Next up is going to be Mew. Mew lost a lot. Mew lost Knockoff, it lost Defog, it lost Roost, and it lost Teleport. Now, obviously, it still gets access to moves like Soft Boiled, so that's fine. It lost Defog, and that is a big deal because Stall Break from Mew with Defog is a really common set. Teleport is not the end of the world because it also has access to Volt Switch and U-Turn and Flip Turn still. I guess Flip Turn is not in the game, or either way. But losing Teleport means it's not a slow momentum Pokemon anymore. Losing Roost means that if it's something running a Soft Boiled, for example, and they try to imprison you, I know it's a very rare occurrence, but it could definitely happen still. And then Defog, losing that is a huge deal. And then Knockoff, once again, just like a lot of other Pokemon, losing Knockoff is just devastating for a Pokemon that really relies on this for a support option. Losing Knockoff can be really big. Other than that, we have Scizor. So Scizor actually was in one of the video I did for the buffs because it did gain a lot, but it did lose a ton. It lost Dual Wing Beat, Knockoff, and Bug Bite for its attacking moves, almost all of which were boosted by Technician, Knockoff being the exception, but Knockoff is like arguably the best move in the game, and it lost Roost. That means this Pokemon is very much focused on being a hyper-offensive Pokemon that can just break through teams as much as possible, click Swords Dance, click maybe Trailblaze to get a speed boost, click the Pounce or whatever the new move is, I think it's Pounce, the new Bug move that's Technician boosted, and then click Bullet Punch. That's really all it's going to do now. It can't be a defensive check to a lot of things, and that really hurts it. I wish it didn't come to that, but hey, it is what it is. The Toxapex, a Pokemon I'm happy got nerfed. I don't like this Pokemon at all. I think it's very bad. I also think it's not healthy for the metagame. And then lost Scald and Knockoff, which is a big deal. Losing Scald means it can't effectively just sit in front of something and go for Scald 100 times until it hopefully burns it. That doesn't work that way. Same deal with Knockoff. It now has to rely on its actual attacking stats. It's going to rely on Gunk Shots or Liquidations or Poison Jabs or whatever the case may be. And it's going to try and do damage. It just won't do enough damage. And these moves are utility-based moves, which means that a Pokemon that doesn't want to lose his leftovers now will no longer lose his leftovers. That's a really big deal here. At the same time, it's still going to be a lure for taunt, so be aware for taunt or subsets as well on Toxapex. That's still going to come your way, and it might even be more prevalent now because of the Scald and Knockoff being removed from this Pokemon sets. Next up, we have Hisuian Typhlosion. This is the first one that's not an actual move. This Pokemon actually lost its hidden ability. Flash Fire is no longer the hidden ability for Hisuian Typhlosion, which is a terrible thing because it now has Frisk. Frisk. Out of all moves, out of all abilities, they give it Frisk. When this Pokemon is a fire type, that its Johto form has access to Flash Fire, they should have just kept it. It makes no sense. It's another Fire Ghost type again, but hey, Frisk makes a lot of sense on a Pokemon that is a Ghost type, but Flash Fire makes more sense for this Pokemon and is a really big nerf for the usability for this Pokemon. Next up, we have a Zacian Crown and Zamazenta Crown. The reason being is because this actually got a 10-point drop in its attack stat. So its attack stat is no longer going to be 170, it's going to be 160. So it's a big deal. The regular form of Zamazenta also lost about 10 points in its stats as well. And the Zamazenta Crown form and the regular Zamazenta also lost stats. Zamazenta Crown lost 10 in its attack and 5 in each defense, which to me is like, why did this take 20 points in its stat drops? And why did Zacian Crown only take 10? It was already the worst one. Why would you do that? It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. Anyways, moving on to the next set of 6 Pokemon, we have the couple here that are very similar. We have Libero Cinderace. This got nerfed just like Protein Greninja got nerfed. And the reason being is Libero and Protein, now they only work once while the Pokemon is out on the field. So for example, Cinderace, if it goes for Pyro Ball, it won't prop the Libero. But if it goes for something like Sucker Punch, then it'll be a Dark type until it actually leaves the field, which is really important to note. So you can't always get Stab on everything. It's just Stab on your first attack that would change your type. And that's it. That's a pretty big nerf. because at that point in time, you're not going to be taking the stab damage from basically everything. And you have to be aware of that, especially when you're calculating things, because you might be thinking, okay, if I'm expecting the Cinderace to go for like, I don't know, a gunk shot's going to turn to a poison type, then I have to worry about stab U-turns. You don't have to worry about stab U-turns anymore. It's just going to be regular, non-stab U-turn, doing the same amount of base damage it should be overall. Important to note. Protein, same thing. Literally the exact same ability. We've known that from the beginning. We don't know why Libero was given to this Pokemon, but hey, it's the same thing, and there's no change to this ability compared to Cinderace. They should have just given Cinderace Protein. Why make the new ability anyways? Doesn't make sense at all. Either way, Protein, Libero, same ability, no changes compared to each of them, and they each only work once while the Pokemon is on the field. Another ability that got nerfed is actually Battle Bond. So you see here we have the Ash Greninja form here. This form does actually not exist anymore. It no longer is a thing. What happens is Greninja will be out on the field, it'll get a KO, and then it'll actually boost its stats when it gets the KO. So it's a temporary boost. So it means that if you were to get a KO, the way it worked previously was if you were to go for like Specs Hydro Pump on Greninja, and then you got the KO, you're now your Ash Greninja, you get your boost in your special attack, and speed by significant amounts. Now it's not the case. You get a slight jump up, like a +1 boost in your stats, but when you switch out, those go away. Previously, when you switched out of Ash Greninja, you still kept your stat boosts. So it's a really big deal here that now has been lost. So it's important to note that Battle Bond has been nerfed as well. Next on to something that is a bit less intense and a bit less good is going to be Sylveon. It actually lost Mystical Fire, which is, it seems like a very small deal, but it's actually really big. Reason being is that Mystical Fire was the main way this thing hits Steel types, and the fact that it can't hit Steel types now is a really big indictment on this Pokemon. It's going to rely heavily on like Shadow Balls, and still it's going to be going for your Hyper Voices that are going to be Pixelate boosted, and you're still going to be going for a Baton Pass to switch out, but losing Mystical Fire is a big deal, especially for Pokemon that's also trying to set up on you. Pokemon that are going for Calm Mind consistently, you can keep Mystical Firing them down. Eventually they're going to have to click Recover, and at that point in time you'll have the advantage to be able to do more damage or do more drops to them than would do boosts to their special attack. So very important to note there, that drop. Next up is Cresselia. This Pokemon got a decrease in stats, 10 to its defense and 10 to its special defense, to go down to 110 and 120 respectively. Pretty big deal for this Pokemon that already was losing a lot of favor. It has a lot of good utility moves, especially in doubles, but the issue with this Pokemon is it's such taunt fodder, and it is so weak offensively as well that in singles, it has fallen off the map completely. It really is not a good Pokemon anymore at all, and the fact that it got the nerfs as well is one of the worst things that could have happened to this Pokemon as well. It should have, honestly, in my opinion, it should have gotten a buff, because probably a buff to its attack stats, to be honest. Give it 10 in attack, 10 in special attack would be a lot more usable at that point in time, because at that point, 85 special attack, it actually makes sense. 75, not good at all. But hey, it is what it is. Cresselia, I'm not complaining about it, but I did think it deserved a buff and not a nerf. Next up is going to be Rotom. This goes for all the Rotom forms. At this point in time, we don't know exactly where the different items are in the game to convert your Rotom to Rotom Wash, Heat, Mow, Fan, and Fridge specifically, but we do know that Rotoms, all of them, lost Defog. And that's a big deal, because at this point in time, in Generation 8, Defog Rotom was one of the best sets you could possibly run on those Pokemon, as well as Nasty Plot, of course. It still keeps Nasty Plot from what we know, but losing Defog is devastating, because this Pokemon was so bulky, had great defensive typings for basically everything outside of like the ice form, and either way, it was able to resist a lot of hits, have immunities to ground, have immunities to different typings depending on which one you were, and it was able to really take advantage of those. But now losing Defog is a pretty big deal, because you can't come in freely on and be immune to spikes and defog them away. It really plays an impact on things, on the way you're going to build your teams, the way you're going to draft Pokemon in Pokemon Draft League, and it's going to impact as well how things go and what sets you run in Smogon as well. So yeah, a lot of nerfs here, a lot of big ones here competitively in these next 6 Pokemon. Moving on to our second to last set of 6, we have the Moltres, which actually lost Defog and Toxic. Defog is more of a deal than Toxic, obviously, because you want to be able to run your Defog on your flying types. But losing Defog, not the end of the world. It obviously sucks, but it forces more of a defensive pivot set. It forces more of an offensive set, because you can't run the Defog. And Toxic, same deal. Losing Toxic means that you can't actually just sit in front of something, Toxic it down, and wear it out. That way, you have to really rely on your Mystical Fires, your Will-O-Wisps, you have to rely on your Hurricanes, all these different things. And losing Defog and Toxic plays a really big role in determining what Moltres can actually do for a team composition. Barraskewda, a little bit less of a notable one. This thing lost Flip Turn. Reason why I think this is pretty big and bigger than people would expect it to be is because this Pokemon really had a hard time outside of Rain in general, but now that it lost Flip Turn, it means that it basically is forced to go for Close Combat or Psychic Fangs or Crunch or Liquidation. And if you're not going for Flip Turn, then the main thing is you want to be able to use this as a revenge killer, and it's so fast you want to be able to outspeed basically everything, but you're not going to OHKO everything all the time. So going for Flip Turn when you're in danger of losing your Barraskewda and going into another pivot is really nice. The problem is, now you don't have Flip Turn. Losing Flip Turn, absolutely massive for this Pokemon. One of the biggest losses that is going under the radar in this competitive metagame scene. Next up is going to be Hydreigon, which also lost Roost and Defog. I don't know why it lost Roost and Defog. It is terrible that it did, because the Pokemon went from being one of the better Dragon types and Dark types available to a Pokemon that is now almost solely there to just be an offensive breaker. And when there are better Dark types available nowadays, it doesn't make much sense to choose Hydreigon over some other options here, especially because it lost the utility for Roost and Defog. It still has U-Turn, but losing Roost and Defog takes away a lot of the potential defensive sets that could have come your way from Hydreigon, because its stat distribution is really well rounded. So losing that, a big downside. Zapdos also lost Roost and Defog, and again, you're seeing a trend here. A lot of these stall moves, a lot of the moves that are going to be getting rid of hazards have been removed from the game for some Pokemon, and it's a really big deal. Losing Defog on Zapdos is one of the best defoggers out there. So the fact that it lost access to Defog is terrible. It really reduced a lot of the usage that it's going to have. It still gets access to a Hurricane and Heat Wave and Volt Switch and U-Turn, all these good moves here, but the fact that it lost Roost specifically, that is an absolute nightmare. Again, this is a Pokemon that would come in multiple times, take multiple hits for multiple different things. It would be one of the best Rillaboom checks out there. It'd be a decent-ish check to Excadrill. And now you're losing access to some of your best ways to do those things. That is not a good sign for the continued success of Zapdos. It has been one of the best Pokemon since it's ever come out. It has an amazing typing, amazing stats, and now it's going to be basically an offensive Pokemon once again. And that's really it. And it really hurts, because Zapdos has been one of the best Pokemon that I've ever used before. It's just so bulky, it takes so many hits, and it can do so many different things for a team. And now at this point in time, losing the access to Roost really changes a lot of what you can actually do and what your opponents can expect out of a Zapdos set at any given situation. Next up is going to be Slowbro. This is paired up with Slowking. They both lost the same 3 moves. They lost Scald, Teleport, and Toxic, which really hurts Slowbro. And the fact that Slowking gets access to now Chilly Reception, which is a new move, I've covered that in the buffs video. It's a big deal. Slowbro losing access to Teleport really changes a lot of what you can do. The good news is it still has access to Regen, and it can still just switch out. It still has access to Slack Off, which has been nerfed in terms of PP, but that's not the worst part. Scald was a move that was basically run on every single Slowbro, and now it can't be, which hurts drastically. It's also going to be running most of the time Thunderwave now over something like Toxic, because now the only way it has to set up set up status against your opponent is going to be with Thunderwave. You can't Scald anymore, you can't Toxic. Really big deal here, and I think this is a really big nerf to Stall specifically that hurts Slowbro a lot. And I think honestly nowadays, I'd probably rather have Slowking rather than Slowbro, because it gets access to the Chilly Reception. Either way, Slowking losing Scald, Teleport, and Toxic also hurts it. Definitely it does, but it gets, like I said, that bit of protection, a bit of insurance with the Chilly Reception. It still has ways to break through teams quite effectively, and offensively, I think that Slowking is a bit better than Slowbro is. That's just a personal preference, but at the end of the day, there's definitely some similarities between these Pokemon, but I think that Slowking has now finally overtaken Slowbro as being the better of the 2 slow brothers. Moving on though to the final set of 6 we have, we're talking about Hippowdon first. This lost Toxic. This is a Pokemon in OU that had a lot of 4 Moose Syndrome. A lot of the time you want to run Slack Off and Earthquake. Toxic, you want to run access to Rocks, you want to run access to Yawn as well, you want to access Rock Slide or Stone Edge. There's a lot of things that you wanted to have on a Pokemon like Hippo, but losing Toxic now opens up a little bit for it. The problem with it is, and then when there's a Pokemon that is immune to ground that's coming in, you can no longer just Toxic it. You have to go for like a Rock move and hoping that's going to be super effective or neutral at the best. Not always, that's not always going to be the case. It won't. So you have to be very careful with how you're going to be handling things and what kind of sets you're going to run with Hippowdon when you're going to be dealing damage, as much damage as you possibly can, really, while still being a defensive Pokemon overall. So losing, again, the Toxic, it hurts Hippo a good bit. Moving on is going to be the forces of nature. Thundurus will start with first. This loss of Defog and Knockoff. One of the reasons why Defog and Knockoff are a big deal here is because obviously Prankster Defog is a really useful item to have, really useful moveset and ability to have, and having Knockoff lost as well gets rid of support options. Again, we've covered it before with Knockoff, but losing Knockoff for these Pokemon, it takes away a lot of what they can do in terms of utility, and takes away a lot of what they can do in terms of a surprise factor. You want to make sure that you're able to get rid of random items for different Pokemon. If you're expecting your opponent to run like a Thundurus set that is going to be running like a more offensive variant, and they roll up with just like Knockoff to get rid of an item that's important for them to get rid of for another Pokemon in the back, it's obviously going to be a bit deadly. But losing that now, it takes away a lot of that utility, which was really, really important. So yeah, losing Prankster Defog, bigger than losing Knockoff, but Knockoff, still huge. Next up is Torrentee. Torrentee also lost Defog and Knockoff, and this goes for regular Torn as well, which also has Prankster, but Torrentee is arguably one of the best Pokemon in competitive Pokemon, and losing access to Defog really changes a lot of what it can do. Losing access to Knockoff reduces a lot of utility that it has, because in certain situations, you're fast enough to be able to outspeed things and get a Knockoff against them, and the best part about that is if you're in a situation where you're going to be going for a knockoff against something that would normally KO you if they had like a band, a scarf, sorry, not a band, a scarf, a band, a spec, a life orb, whatever, you can get the knockoff off that Pokemon, survive the hit, U-turn out, and then be able to go and get your regen health back. Now you can't do that. You can just go for the U-turn and get out, but you're not gonna be able to get the information, get rid of the item, all of which has so much usefulness. So it's a really big deal that Torn T loses knockoff, and it definitely goes down in terms of usability in my mind because of the knockoff nerf here. Next up is Lando T. Lando T lost knockoff. It lost defog. It also lost explosion and superpower. Now, while obviously knockoff and defog, I mentioned before with the other forces of nature is a big deal, I think explosion is actually much more of a big deal than people are going to give it credit for. Landorus T had a very common set, which is going to be a lead set, getting up rocks, clicking explosion, so that way your opponent couldn't just defog them away. So losing access to a 145 base power explosion is a nerf, and it's a pretty big nerf at that. Losing superpower as well could be deadly in certain spots where you're going up against a Pokemon that's fighting weak but not ground weak. So depending on what you want to do, superpower nerf could be one of the worst things out there depending on your Landorus set. But still, don't change it. Let me restart that. Do not confuse things. Knockoff and defog, those losses are really impactful to Landorus and probably take it out of contention of being the best Pokemon in the game to definitely a top 10 Pokemon, but it still loses a lot of potency because of the loss of knockoff. Then we have Gyarados. Gyarados lost Power Whip. Power Whip was really good because in a pre-banning of Dynamax, this Pokemon was absolutely insane. Having access to Power Whip and the max move for that, having access to max bounce and everything was really good. And with Terastallizing still in the format here, Power Whip could have been really good if you Power Whipped into a grass type, because you could always just then get a boosted Power Whip against something that was a water type that would normally check your Gyarados. So a lot of really big and bad things are coming Gyarados' way here. Power Whip just being one move, obviously is replaceable by Terra Blast and Terra Blast Grass, but again, you don't have to Terra Blast Grass to be able to just go for a grass move with Power Whip. That's one of the bigger drops to it because it could have gone for Terra Blast Flying. Now it's going to have spots that are going to be tough to decide with. Is it Terra Blast Flying or Terra Blast Grass? Which is it going to be? Who knows? And then finally, Indeedee. Indeedee has lost a good bit here. Losing access to, obviously Psychic Surge is going to be the main ability it has. Losing Mystical Fire, that's the best way it has to hit the Steel type Pokemon that isn't like, I think Focus Blast it gets as well. Doesn't even get Focus Blast. Aura Sphere, no fighting type moves aside of like Drain Punch. But still, Mystical Fire was the best way it has to hit these Steel types, which is a really big deal, losing access to a way to hit those things. And of course, Expanding Force, losing that as well is a really negative thing for it too. One of the main issues with Expanding Force, obviously, is it's boosted by the Psychic Terrain that it sets up for itself. Obviously, it's really powerful and you really want to be able to take advantage of that, but losing Expanded Force, that nerf can be absolutely detrimental to a way this Pokemon actually does what it does. It's an amazing move that gets boosted. It's just like the Grassy Glide nerf. So losing that losing Grassy Glide on Rillaboom and losing Expanding Force on Indeedee is, I think it's for the better because you don't want them setting up for their own terrain, their own breaking potential. But I'm very excited to see what we can do with Indeedee with terrain still being available without having to deal with just Expanding Force shenanigans, and that's it. Well, everyone, that is going to be my top 30 or whichever 30 Pokemon that I think got really heavily nerfed in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And ideally, when the games come out in about 2 days' time, we should have hopefully a bit more information. Hopefully we can see if these Pokemon are going to eventually get these moves back, because losing these moves really changes a lot of the power level of these Pokemon. So guys, make sure to leave a like on the video if you guys enjoyed it. We're aiming for 75 likes on today's content, as well as commenting down below which Pokemon you thought got nerfed the worst, or which Pokemon that I ended up missing in this discussion. And of course, subscribe to the channel. We're aiming for 2,000 subscribers on the, before the end of the year. So guys, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe to all that great stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all tomorrow.